What's going on? The Czechs, Poles, Swedes, and Kazakhs are up to something again. It's buzzing in Europe, ladies and gentlemen, and even in the distant steppes, things are happening, pointing from a geopolitical perspective to changes in the world, a decline in Russia's influence, and greater European readiness for challenges that may come in the future. So Poland is building for the Americans. We've seen investments in the Kościuszko camp. Let's say that's how it's pronounced. However, what's also important today, and what we'll discuss, is of course that the Swedes are looking for new sailors because there will be new ships, and that Kazakhstan is not buying Russian military equipment. And perhaps most crucially, that the state bought Explosia from Agrofert a quarter of a century ago, and now the state should have Explosia. And now they're thinking about selling Synthesia again because it started making money and it's a state-owned company. So we'll go through all of this. But we'll start in Poland. Right now in Poland, they're finishing construction on facilities that are supposed to serve as a base for American soldiers. Poland is working very hard to secure a permanent presence of American soldiers on its territory, and they're really doing a lot for it. For example, the construction of that base and the logistics center, which is supposed to serve, and we'll look at photos of the base and what actually happened there, which is supposed to serve as a facility for a mobile air base. At the same time, there are supposed to be large fuel storage facilities in the area and at the base. At the same time, there should be landing pads for helicopters there, but obviously also large warehouses for military equipment like the military vehicles present here, or for heavy military equipment like the tanks present here. Of course, there should also be barracks, kitchens, and dining facilities. In short, something that would provide comfort for American soldiers who could use this base in case of deployment. And theoretically, they could use it if it's adjusted a bit as a reason to stay in Poland permanently. Because, as I said, the Poles really want the Americans to have a presence in Poland. There's already quite a lot of talk about it, but it's not completely certain yet, because at one moment they say yes, and the next moment they say no. Will you get married? Won't you get married? Will it work out? Won't it work out? It's kind of confusing. Donald Tusk commented on it humorously when he said that this is a way to confuse Putin. Yeah, because if even the Poles and Americans don't know whether American soldiers will be on this base or not, then Putin definitely doesn't know either. So the confusion in the Kremlin must be huge, of course. Well, anyway, of course, if there were and probably will be American soldiers present on Polish territory, it gives a great sense of certainty and security not only to Poland, but also to the Czech Republic. Because after all, Poland is kind of our shield, our buffer in case the Russians wanted to try something, in case something went wrong. Therefore, Poland, which serves as an American fortress in Eastern Europe, a solid point that has good relations with the United States and at the same time fulfills its commitments to NATO and puts into its army everything it can and even what it can't, that's the kind of Poland that is very useful to us Czechs and could be very beneficial for us in the future. I think it would be very beneficial for us if we established closer, better relations with them. And I've talked about this back when there was talk here about some lousy V3 without Poland and so on. It would be much better to establish better, closer relations and cooperation specifically with Poland, and maybe right now, since we have a new Prime Minister in Hungary, perhaps even through the V4 platform from which we could kick out the Slovaks until they improve a bit. But mainly, we should get along well with the Hungarians and especially with the Poles, and we definitely shouldn't abandon the Poles because of the Slovaks. That would be very, very wrong, and now it would be really good to deepen it even more, especially as they are moving towards Polish-American cooperation and carrying out such impressive defense projects. It wouldn't cost us much, and the fact that we sent helicopters to Poland under Minister Czernachova to shoot down drones was a good move. We should do more. However, the Poles will host their American guests nicely here at the new base. And by the way, that's something that should be happening in the Czech Republic as well. Because in the event of a major conflict, we wouldn't be a country where most of the fighting takes place. We would mainly be a logistics center with the state of our highways and how poor our military infrastructure is, I don't think we would be able to fulfill this role. However, let's move on to the next topic. And the next topic is that they're looking for a huge crew for ships, 500 sailors. Ladies and gentlemen, if you still don't know where to go, or rather where to settle down, and you've been tempted by service at sea, it's pretty easy for you now. The only thing you need is to become a Swedish citizen, give up your Czech citizenship, apply as a candidate to be a sailor in the Swedish Navy, pass the exams, and off you go to the FDI frigate. That is a frigate that will be built by Naval Group. Sorry, yes, Naval Group. Naval Group. So, a company, a French company, Naval Group, and it will be 120 meters long. It should have 125 crew members, which means since there will be 4 of them, Sweden really needs 500 crew members. It will be equipped with air defense, including anti-ballistic missiles. It will have the capability to carry drones. There will probably also be a helicopter on board, or maybe not, or maybe some landing craft, either hovercraft or boats. As you can see, they could be launched through this opening. Overall, I have to say, it's really a beautiful modern ship. So if you're interested in serving in the Swedish Navy, if you've ever been drawn to ships, now's your chance. Nothing is holding you back anymore. Service in a foreign military is technically illegal, but on the other hand, if you give up your Czech citizenship and obtain Swedish citizenship, then you can absolutely legally and without any risk of punishment defend our NATO pond, our beautiful and amazing Baltic Sea, to make sure no uninvited guest gets through. And when things get tough, it will be you and your frigate holding back Russian forces with a blockade. So that's what your job might involve, but overall, it's very positive to see that the Swedes, unlike us, take defense seriously, that they want to strengthen their navy, that they know being part of NATO means something, that it's above all a privilege, and that right now they're basically grateful they can save on their own defense, since they don't have to rely solely on themselves and can count on us with our lousy, crumbling army, badly managed, where people are burned out and drink energy drinks just to get by, and it's just terrible. Damn, the Czech army is so awful, damn. We have much to improve. Hearing what's happening there always makes me want to cry. However, the point is that the Swedish army used the money they saved to strengthen themselves even more. That's a good approach, not what we're doing. And when we're talking about us, let's move on to Explosia. Ladies and gentlemen, a company from Pardubice that actually has a history. For example, the famous Semtex was developed there. It used to have a great history. For example, it was bought or privatized by Andrej Babiš. Then things happened that made Andrej Babiš quite a bit richer, and then the company actually returned to the state, just to sum it up briefly. But that's not important right now. What's important is that Prime Minister Andrej Babiš wants to privatize this company. In other words, he wants to sell it to get some money and probably cover some expenses for 1 year. It's like selling a hen that lays golden eggs because you don't want to wait for her to lay 10 golden eggs, and you get the price of 5 golden eggs for the hen, so you would rather sell her. An absolutely financially irresponsible decision, total madness, right? On the other hand, I agree that when a company is making a profit, when we know it would survive even without the state, it's good for that company to go into private hands, because a private owner will always manage the company better than the state. That's the golden rule. And at this moment, the company is making money mainly because of the current geopolitical situation, so it would be good to cash in on it and sell it to someone who can keep it running and make good use of the money. The fact that the company will be profitable, gain some solid markets, establish contacts and so on, and through its operations continue to contribute in some way to European defense. But at the same time, we wouldn't lose all that money because it would be ideal if the state kept some share in the company. There's talk about a kind of golden share, which would basically guarantee the state that in case of emergency, it can come at any time and say, look, we need you to produce this and that, and we have priority over everyone else. So in this respect, the defense capability of the Czech Republic wouldn't completely collapse if we privatize this company. And as I said, personally, I'm a fan of privatizing companies that can actually exist on their own and that we don't really need, in the sense that the state doesn't need to own them. At the moment when a company is supposed to have a state owner, it has to be a company that couldn't survive on its own, but at the same time provides a service that can't be replaced by the private market because it's not profitable. In other words, it doesn't make money. Yes, state-owned companies effectively shouldn't be making money. State-owned companies should provide a service that the state needs, that it thinks it needs, and that the private market won't provide for it. Yeah, so that's just how it is. Moving on. Otherwise, I'd like to say that by the company paying taxes and continuing to exist here, we won't lose all the revenue from its potential sales. In the end, it might actually be more worthwhile than owning it. For example, the company could grow massively under private ownership, and then we could get more from taxes than we could now from any effective corporate profits. That's certainly a possibility. Overall, if there are any concerns that selling it would mean losing our defense capability, as I said, the golden share guarantees that we won't lose it. The only real concern I have about the sale is that Andrej Babiš could buy it, pull some tricks to make a lot of money from it, and then return it to the state stripped of value. Oh, I said the word, okay. In other words, that he would do something shady there. That's what I'm worried about. But as for the sale itself, the privatization of state-owned companies that aren't like the post office but are profitable state companies that the state doesn't need to own, personally, I'm quite a fan of that. So that's my take on it. Otherwise, of course, Synthesia Explosia is a very good company in that it produces nitrocellulose, which is something extremely necessary for artillery shells and explosives. There are only very few companies in Europe that produce this. So yes, through these things, through investments in these things, and through the privatization of these things, we could have a big say in the arms industry in Europe, just like we did in the past. And personally, I have a bit of a dream, that some of those state-owned companies that make money could be semi-privatized. Maybe they could become public service companies like a public service factory, a public service brewery, just a public service hotel, hotel thermal, and so on, with the idea that people would send a part of their taxes there, which would then grow in value within the company, and the profits would be paid out to those people once a year as dividends, or it could be added to their retirement savings or something like that. Similar to how the Norwegians have funds that are basically tied to the Norwegian oil industry. I'm just saying. And with that, I'm closing the chapter on Synthesia Explosia. We'll discuss it more thoroughly and in greater depth in Warmongers on Thursday, so watch Warmongers on Thursday evening. And then there's the last point, and the last point I wanted to discuss today is that Kazakhstan will be purchasing a fairly large amount of equipment in Turkey. Yeah, we have some armored personnel carriers here with a 100mm cannon using Chinese technology. We have some similar carriers with fewer wheels, and overall there are also plans for light tanks like Tulpar. Simply put, the important news is that Kazakhstan is buying armored vehicles in Turkey. They've decided to move away from Russia. They've decided to diversify their sources, and that's a sign that even though the Russian arms industry supplies a large amount of equipment to its own state because it's so tied up in the war, it can't really make money from foreign government contracts. That effectively means the only one giving money to the Russian arms industry is the Russian state, which means that money is basically just being printed, which means it's not a very healthy way to do things. At the same time, it could be proof that Kazakhstan simply assessed that Russian equipment doesn't have the quality they need, and it's also the case that they're cooperating more with the Chinese and Turks than with the Russians, so it's also a political shift. In this respect, it's a bad news in a way because it means greater influence from China and Turkey, but on the other hand, it's good news in the sense that it means Russia's influence is receding, which is what this suggests to us. And that was an overview of today's rearmament special, if I can put it that way. Ladies and gentlemen, please write in the comments what you think about all this, whether you personally are or aren't fans of privatizing the state nitrocellulose factory, whether you are or aren't fans of building logistics centers and maybe attracting American soldiers here. They could have been here a long time ago if there had been a radar, but anyway, attracting American soldiers like the Poles do. Or actually, I guess you wouldn't want the Czech Republic to have a navy, right? But maybe, are you glad that Sweden isn't a free rider like we are? And do you think we should stop being a free rider and start doing better what we should be doing within NATO? Or are you just typically Czech and thinking, hey, as long as Poland is here to protect us, we can just put our feet up on the table like the Austrians and chill? That's all. Please leave a comment. I would really appreciate it. Give it a like, share it. Support the content, even through QR codes if you like it. Independent content is what stands between us and totalitarianism. So that's that. Take care, join the streams where this video was also created, and we're moving forward.